Okay, in this tutorial, we're going to actually no, it's not a tutorial. It's a base tour. I'm not going to actually. I'm going to try and minimize the tutorialing here. We're not actually going to individual builds. What we're going to cover in this is how everything actually interacts to give you a nice late game sustainable base that you don't have to worry about, where all your needs are met and you can effectively run it indefinitely. So to cover that, the first thing we're going to look at is water, because water is the lifeblood of any base. The more water you have, the bigger your base can be. Now, I have about 3.5 kilos of water on this map. 3.05 kilos of renewable water on this map. I have 3 cool steam vents. Those 3 cool steam vents basically all dump into this one tank. Now, my system is, I use a very efficient system for pulling out water, so normally it comes out at between 95 to 96 degrees. So I'm getting boiling hot water coming out of here. All of that is dumped into this central tank, and then immediately 2 kilos of that water is pumped out and goes straight down to the oil biome. And then it's just dumped into 2 oil wells I've got down here. I've got 2 oil wells on this map. So a kilo in each oil well, and then all the oil that produces just sort of flows down here and dumps into this central collection area. Both sides. So all of it dumps in here. Then that water, that crude oil is then pumped up here and goes into a petroleum boiler. Just a simplistic petroleum boiler. It can handle up to 10 kilos, but I'm only running it at 6. Now, the reason I've got it at 6 is this is sort of a flow control. I want to keep this oil level down here stable. So I'm only putting 6 through. And whenever this pressure sensor down here detects that there's more than 800 kilos of oil, it sends an activation signal to this sort of bypass valve. It's basically just an on-off liquid shut-off. And what that does is it allows the oil to bypass this flow control and dumps 10 kilos of oil into the system instead. Like, see here, you can see a big blob of 10 kilos going through. It doesn't help my efficiency too much, but it does make sure that the oil level down here remains effectively stable. It never really goes up or down above this point, making sure I have a stable crude oil supply. Now, all that petroleum, once it's created, is pumped out here and it goes up and it takes a right here and goes over to my power plant area. Any excess takes a left, and any excess that can't be burnt immediately, it takes a left and gets dumped into my petroleum buffer tank. My buffer tanks are way too big. I overbuilt those, I admit. Now, there's also a little overflow sensor in here. When the petroleum level gets too high, it sends an automation signal over to my power plants and tells them to turn on and start burning off all that excess petroleum. So I have 1 petroleum generator running at all times, and then the other 3 kick in whenever the petroleum level gets too high. All this means that I'm doing is I'm producing 6.6 kilos of crude oil. I'm immediately turning that into petroleum, and then I'm immediately burning it. It just makes sure that it spits out this polluted water down here. Now, the reason I want the polluted water is for every kilo of water I put in here, I get 1.2 kilos of polluted water back. So I'm effectively turning 2 kilos of clean water, clean hot water, into 2.4 kilos of polluted water that is icy cold. Because of the output values of these power generators, the output of them is the same temperature as the building. So I've basically chilled everything in here so that my polluted water is icy cold. So I turn 2 kilos of clean water into 2.4 kilos of polluted water at about minus 10 degrees. Then I dump all that polluted water up here in my polluted water storage tank. Around this point, I'd gotten wise to I didn't need so much storage anymore. So this one's actually quite simple, but the first thing that happens is I actually have just this little closed loop here. This isn't actually connecting anything. It just goes round and round in a circle. And there's radiant pipes up here, radiant pipes down here, and insulated in the middle. All it's effectively doing is transferring temperature from up here to down here. So this means I end up with about 30 degree polluted water, and it chills down my hot water down to about 60 degrees. Just means I'm not pumping anything too hot or too cold around the place, and helps keep my base a little more thermally stable. I am using insulated pipes for everything, but might as well make it easier on myself. So this polluted water is linked into a water sieve. So I just pump out the polluted water, it goes to a water sieve, and that water sieve is hooked up to this vent here. So what happens if I start pulling out more water than I can actually get refilled by my geysers, the polluted water gets sieved and dumped in here. So this just makes sure that my clean water is always topped up, as well as that it's 40 degree clean water coming out of here. So it also helps chill down this tank a little bit as well. Now, I am going to have excess polluted water. I'm not actually using all the water I'm getting. So to dispose of any excess water, it's all going to be the polluted type. I just have a pressure sensor here that activates let's see, a little valve over here. So what happens is any excess polluted water just gets dumped in here into reed fiber. I don't really need the reed fiber. I could pump this up to space and dump it into a vacuum, but I kind of want the reed fiber for some insulation and maybe some projects later. But for the time being, it just acts as a wonderful dump. These things consume enormous amounts of polluted water. It's a great dump system that you can put together really quickly. So clean water gets turned into crude oil gets turned into petroleum, the petroleum gets turned into really chilly polluted water, and the polluted water gets turned back into clean water and also helps chill down the hot water. This just nice little closed loop system. Now, other water, oh, there's another little water pipe going up here. This one goes all the way to the top of the map. This one is going to my oxygen production. For some reason, I decided to build my oxygen production all the way up here in a late game renovation. So I have 3 electrolyzer setups here. Very simple. I just keep them 4 tiles high. It's just one of those things I like to do. These 2 bottom ones here, they actually send oxygen back down to my base for my duplicants. And the top one up here is 1 kilo of oxygen dedicated to the Rocketry system. I'll cover that in a little bit. But this effectively means I'm using about 2.4 kilos of water. I think it worked out as 2.3, 2.4 kilos of water entirely. That's inclusive of the. I'm not including the 2 kilos of water that go into the oil wells. Those 2 kilos I effectively get back, and I'm basically taking my 3 kilos of clean water and I end up with 3.4 kilos of clean water I can play around with. And I'm using only 2.4 of it between oxygen generation and rocketry. So that's pretty much all the water I'm using because I've went with a water-free food source, namely because it's just so handy. Here is my food source, barbecue, shovel voles. These things drop 5 times as much meat as any other critter on death, and as well as that, I do need to dispose of regolith. My game was getting really slow. I had 7,500 tons of regolith, and then I started shovel vole farming, and these critters eventually, over many, many, many cycles, managed to consume it all. Now, these things will occasionally, 1 or 2 of them will go starving, but it usually doesn't last very long, and this system is stupidly simple. They just drop the eggs on the ground, they hatch. These things can't get overcrowded, so you don't have to worry about incubators or moving eggs around. You just let them drop on the ground. Anytime the critters get in here, get above 20, they get auto-wrangled and drowned and turned into meat for barbecue. Now, a quick note before I cover pinch of pepper nuts. I have just some regolith harvesting going on. I have automated it all. This area is sealed off. The duplicants can't get in here. And all that happens is these little auto sweepers here pick it all up and dump it into the conveyor rail system, and that just sends it down automatically to my my shovel vole farms. This just automates all the collection of regolith from my solar farm areas. I also have another one over here, more shipping rails, all going down to the shovel voles, and the shovel voles consume it all. All those areas are blocked off, duplicants aren't allowed in, and it just makes things much simpler. And why is that door open? Okay, never mind. And the only other regolith comes from the bottom of these rocket launch tubes. I couldn't find a way to really automate this conveniently. There was just there's too much hot exhaust to deal with, and the solutions I came up with were too complicated. It was too convoluted. Eventually, I just switched to duplicant labor. It was simpler, and that's how I dispose of regolith and turn it all into meat. Now, to actually turn that meat into barbecue, you are going to need pinch of pepper nuts. And pinch of pepper nuts do grow wild, and the great thing about pinch of pepper nuts is you only need 2 of them. 2 pinch of pepper nuts growing wild will feed 1 duplicate. So here we have enough pinch of pepper nut to feed 3 duplicates. Actually, 4 duplicates. There's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Yep, I have more than enough pinch of pepper nut to feed everyone on barbecue. In fact, I've got excess pinch of pepper nut lying on the ground dying. Now, to actually turn it into barbecue, I've went with a very simplistic system. I've seen people with hundreds of fridges, but all I did was I've actually plugged these in. I know, sacrilege. But it just simplified things an awful lot. One of these holds meat. One of these holds pinch of pepper nut. They're set to priority 6. It's the highest priority I put on pretty much any storage. And the auto sweeper here fills up the grill when it needs it. Duplicants bring it along. I was going to set up automation to ship these things in via shipping rails, but my game is already down to about 10 to 14 frames per second, depending on how long I run it. So I decided not to add more strain. So the pinch of pepper nuts and the meat get turned into barbecue here, and then the barbecue gets stored in these 2 fridges. 2 fridges full of barbecue equals about 800,000 calories. So I'm pretty happy with that. And it never goes off in here. It's pretty much the same as having them in chlorine. Also, it's in carbon dioxide as well, just because. Now, these fridges, when they're full, give out an automation signal, a green automation signal when they're full. So all I've done is I've hooked the two barbecue ones up to an AND gate. That AND gate is hooked up to a NOT gate, so whenever both of them are full, they turn off the grill. So I'm not bothering building more barbecue. I didn't have this originally, and I was just putting lots of barbecue was ending up on the ground. I had loads and loads of barbecue that just eventually rot. Instead, I just have these two fridges here, and I collect all the meat and pinch of pepper nuts and dump them in it. Eventually, they just go stale and go off. These aren't plugged in or anything. So eventually, they go stale, they go off, and then I dump them into the compost heap and turn them into dirt, just so I don't have them lying around the place. Keep things nice and tidy. For my power solution, I also went with brute force and ignorance as well. There's no real fancy automation or complicated builds in this. This is all just very straightforward brute force. In this instance, for the power, I just went with a simple power spine thing as well. I'm using heavy conductive wire made out of gold. I know people like to use heavy wire because it's cheaper or something, but I just had enough gold. I said, why not? It actually is really good for decor purposes, but okay, I'm tutorialing again. Right, so all I do is I have this power spine here, and this is my original power brick that was powering everything before I got onto solar, and then this power spine just runs up the entire length of the map here. And then it gets a bit of scoliosis here, takes a left, goes up here and hooks into my solar. So all the solar is hooked into it, everything. Now, since it's mostly off solar, and what I've done is I've put in a couple of battery boxes here, just a couple of self-cooled battery boxes. They also work as plug sockets, stuck in a few transformers, just so I could, run off power lines to everywhere. And this ensures these batteries basically ensure that even when the doors are closed, bunker doors are closed, or things like that, there's just plenty of power left over. As well as that, I'm generating about 6.6 kilowatts of power constantly from the petroleum generators, so I don't think these things have ever actually gone below like 90% at any point. I've never actually seen it happen. Now, the lazy way I'm distributing the power is I just have lots and lots of transformers, and those transformers go off and feed everything. And those transformers, to limit the power flow on them, I just didn't build anything more than I didn't go above 2 kilowatts. I basically kept every cable below 2 kilowatts. It's not hugely efficient. I'm sure there's alternating ways of doing it and running. There's plenty of stuff on the forums if you want to see how to alternate things more nicely and make it more efficient in some way. But honestly, I just dumped a bunch of them in here, and I just make sure they're all. If I'm going to have a lot of them in one area, I have a cooling source around to make sure they don't overheat anything. Just made things stupidly simple. And then if you'll scroll here, you'll just see I basically have run conductive wire, just regular conductive wire off, made out of iron, just to feed all my places. Very, very simplistic. Just huge long runs of cable, brute force and ignorance every single which way. But occasionally though I will put in something like this. This is just a power brick. It just allows you to break off lines, and I just stuck in a cooling source here. This was because I was going to be running an awful lot of power stuff here, so I decided I'll just chill it all and make sure it's done conveniently. Oh yeah, I'll cover that in a minute. But this is the rocketry system I set up. Rockets are pretty simple to work with. My launch tubes look a bit weird. I know they're double layered, but there's actually a reason for that. Rock meteors, have this quirk where if they hit a bunker tile wall at an angle or any wall at an angle, the regolith they spawn can actually appear on the opposite side of the bunker tiles. And this can cause you complications depending on how your build is configured. Simplest way to stop it is just double line your bunkers. That way no regoliths can actually spawn on the opposite side. The second layer doesn't have to be bunker tiles, it can be anything at all. It's just there to stop the regolith spawning. Now, when it comes to the actual launching of rockets and all that, it's very simple. These things are all set on automatic. I haven't touched these in ages. When they land, the shipping rails basically ship out the resources that are in them and dump it off down to a storage area. Also, they're immediately hooked up to, well, the fuel supply, so these things are just constantly rotating. Any rocket that lands immediately starts getting fueled. If 2 of them land, they can fight for the fuel. I don't care. I have 2 hydrogen rockets running and 4 petroleum. And all I'm doing to feed them is just this little design over here. It's pretty small. You don't really need anything much bigger than that unless you're going absolutely crazy. I mean, I'm running 6 rockets on it, so it works just fine. Now, the whole thing is also hooked to an automation grid, so whenever they're actually finished unloading and fueling, they automatically relaunch themselves. I don't have to actually do anything. I've also sealed them in, so I don't even have gantries here. I eventually got good enough at this that I knew what I needed to do, got it all done and finished. I've also torture tested these on using a bug so that even if the rocket in here fired constantly for 10 cycles, that's what I tested it to, it won't actually melt anything. The dry heat that comes out the bottom will heat stuff up, but the exhaust that comes off these, the carbon dioxide and the steam, depending on the rocket type, it actually helps. It's below the melting point of steel, so it helps counteract the heat actually coming out of the engine exhaust. So this thing will never actually melt. In my stress testing, I've never had any problems. As you can see, this is 800 degrees, 600, 600, 600. They'll never actually melt. I've never had any automation melt. But everything in here is steel. Steel, 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 everywhere. Until you get out to, say, past the insulation. Once you get past the insulation, I've just switched to iron ore, and you can pretty much use anything you want there. But anything that actually is interacting with the rockets or touching them, yeah, all steel. Lots and lots of steel. I have to do a lot of steel farming to get it. In fact, the steel farming is still going because I haven't bothered stopping the rockets. I run them mostly out to the satellites, one to the local one and one last one out here just to source some isoresonant fullerene. In case you're curious, these are 7 tiles wide. They're exactly wide enough for the rocket. That means anytime any regolith ends up in here, every time the rocket lands or takes off, it basically destroys the regolith, turning it into debris so that my duplicants can actually pick it up. That way I don't have to actually issue any dig commands here. It's all automated. The rockets actually crush it and do it for me. The base is not actually perfectly sustainable because eventually my base will fill up with carbon, refined carbon, diamond, whatever I'm harvesting from space. Eventually it will actually fill up the system if I keep it running long enough. Um, and one other side effect you have to deal with when bringing in that much material, that material actually has a tendency to heat the place up. I didn't have this, I put in this cooling solution later just to make sure that the shipping rails coming out of here go by here, because they were soaking up heat from the metal bunker tiles, and the heat was eventually ending up in my base. So I'm now chilling it down, but I'm probably going to have to put in a heat source to counteract the chill now. But whatever, it's not too bad. But temperature-wise, most of the base is pretty warm, always about 40 degrees or so. There's a few cold areas over here, but I've sealed them off. Uh, and the oil biome, of course, is about 80 degrees. I'm actually just using the crude oil that's coming out to cool it all. But thermal-wise, my base is just rock solid. I haven't had any problems at all. Now, for actually cooling my base itself, I have a very simplistic cooling solution. Just this over here cools this. This icebox cools the water supply. The water supply cools the incoming oxygen that I build up in space. And at the same time, chilling this water is actually coming from over here. That water sieve, the excess from it is actually dumped into this tank to keep my toilets and sinks running. I never bothered with showers. My duplicate morale is high enough. I don't need it. Uh, Effectively, I don't even have massage tables, jukeboxes, any of those morale boosters. You don't need them. They're only really necessary on the higher difficulty levels, I'd say. As well as that, I use this same chilling solution here that chills this water, also provides cooling to my base. I just have, okay, it looks kind of complicated, but it's basically just a loop system going around, back and forth, left to right, going all the way around. It's just granite pipes, and it just does a loop all the way through and then back through the liquid tank at the bottom with radiant piping. This makes sure that any heat that gets in here just gets evened out all to about 23 degrees. Like all these space artifacts I brought in, all of them were super hot from the exhaust, and eventually the radiant piping going around just soaks up the heat and kills it all. So I don't have to worry about my base ever changing temperature. Last thing I suppose is then decor. Decor is pretty standard. I just had statues here where you see these pedestals. I had statues. I've just been swapping them out for these space things. I'd filled up these areas here with them and I was like, right, I'll just actually replace my statues now. So if you replace, I just replaced the statues with these and I put glass tiles everywhere. And that just allows the decor from the floors above and below to get through. I know some people like to use metal tiles, but glass tiles just allow more decor through, so why not? This gets the decor levels up to absolutely ridiculous amounts. Like when they're sleeping, they're exposed to like 1300 decor in some places. Everything is all nicely heavily decored. Um, for the actual power spine itself, I just put in these statues to keep everything stable. It just counteracts all the negative decor. Um, so if you'll zoom out here, you'll see I actually, oh yeah, I did a late game change. I had about 200 tons of gold. I have a gold volcano over here. So the gold volcano eventually just accumulated so much gold. I was like, well, I'll just replace all the tiles with gold tiles. Why not? Might as well get to play some bling. So this has kind of resulted in the entire map ending up to be a little bit glowy when I look at it this way. But the biggest decor bonuses are down here where I've actually run my power spine. I just ran statues with it to counteract it all. And I've pretty much put gold tiles everywhere. So not really a big deal. It was just a little bit of a fun late game project to get around to. Just one last note for morale. You'll notice I haven't bothered actually putting in any beds. Plastic beds. I've kept them with bunks. Well, I didn't really see the need to upgrade. If you look under consumables here, everyone's got 40 morale, sometimes 42. So let's say 40 morale on average across the board. And I have not bothered training them up beyond this point here, exosuit engineer, tenured scientist, and that. That's a plus 20 morale requirement. I haven't bothered with the only people who have space cadet and astronaut are my 6 astronauts, and they don't ever get out of the rocket, so I don't really care about them. I could give them special foods if needs be. So 20 morale is all they need, and they've all got 40, which means I didn't really see a point in getting an extra 1 morale by switching them to nicer beds. That's more when you want to make your base look really nice and shiny and perfect. You can do that, but I just wasn't bothered. I didn't see the point. There's no showers. Don't need the morale bonus from that either. There's no jukeboxes, massage tables, anything like that. No one ever gets any stress because they've all got the more morale you have above what the requirement is, it acts as a stress reducer. So since they've got 20 more morale than they actually need, they all just don't get stressed. I mean, I could swim them through a volcano. They'd probably be, well, assuming they didn't die, they'd be fine. For germ polluted water disposal, as in the toilets and the sinks, I don't bother recycling it. I don't need to. I just dump it into reed fiber. I've been doing this since the beginning of the game, and I didn't really see a need to try decontaminating it or do anything with it or running renewable systems. It just wasn't worth it. I just dump it into reed fiber and dispose of it. They're great disposal tools. I did forget to mention how I was cooling this whole area down. That's actually very simplistic. The waste carbon dioxide, I was pumping it up to space to dispose of it, so I just actually put in some flow control valves, and I'm actually just metering out just small amounts of carbon dioxide that actually gets dumped in here into the area. 100 grams a second through each of these vents. And what this does is it basically just gives a medium to transfer heat, and this stops all my things from overheating. And most of the things in here are made of niobium, so it would take an awful lot to overheat them, but the small amount of carbon dioxide here just helps temperature to transfer between the items and make sure that the regolith that falls down here helps cool everything down. Now, the carbon dioxide does actually cause a little bit of interference with my scanners, which is not perfect, but I usually get about 40% scan quality, or even 60% out of some of these. So it does mean that my network's usually pretty decent. I'm definitely going to detect things well in advance of them actually crashing. But as well as those three, I've actually just got a naked scanner. You need to actually keep a naked scanner. I know it's annoying, but currently with the way the game mechanics work, there's no real way to prevent rockets from smashing into your doors. Well, you can minimize the chances by, oh, it's going to be about 17.5% chance if you don't have a naked scanner that they'll smash into the bunker doors when they land. I have 6 rockets running. I can't afford that. Actually, I can't afford it. It's just really annoying to deal with. Instead, you just keep a naked scanner. This will occasionally get entombed in regolith, but the drills keep it open, and the duplicants have to come up here and repair it every so often. It's not ideal, but currently it's the best we have to work with. And it just makes sure that I haven't had any smashed bunker doors that I've seen, but I do have left this running for a few hundred cycles unattended, and I don't know if it happened or not. This area here, I have set the duplicants access it to remove the regolith, and the only thing I'd be worried about for duplicant death right now is it is a potential that a duplicant could end up in here trying to collect regolith, and then a meteor could come down and actually entomb them, and that would actually mean they'd end up entombed and dead if I was not attending the place. So for leaving it unattended, I haven't had that problem yet, but it is the potential that you could lose a duplicant to that, getting entombed in regolith if a meteor lands on them while they're in here. I want to talk about sleet wheat. If you're a newer player and you're tempted to go with sleet wheat, my advice would be don't. Sleet wheat is it's more of a status crop. It's not a food crop, it's a status crop. It takes water to make it, which, yeah, I've got a kilo of water per second left over, spare. And that's after I've added an extra 0.4 kilo to my water supply. It's very expensive water-wise to make them. Also, as well as that, you've got to have a renewable source of dirt, and dirt, oh, look in the forums. There is huge threads on how to get enough dirt. Basically, it's either petroleum boiling, natural gas boiling, so that you can get enough carbon dioxide to sieve enough polluted water to make enough dirt. Or you can do multiple rocket missions out to the actual organic mass planets, and you can bring back algae and slime, which you then cook to make dirt. They're basically the only options to get enough dirt to keep your sleet wheat farm going. They're the 3 main ones. Personally, I prefer the organic mass one because rockets are pretty simple once you get them set up and running. Actually, yeah, for rockets, I would like to point out this rocket here going to the furthest planet uses about 100 105 grams of oxygen a second on average. So that's what it's running me. That's the cost it's running me, 105 grams of oxygen a second. The most inefficient one is the petroleum rocket going to the nearest planet. That uses about 200 grams of oxygen a second. So running rockets is actually not that expensive. It's actually reasonably cheap. I think these four rockets are all going to the satellite, and they're using about, oh, I think it's about 150 grams of oxygen a second on average. Rockets are not actually that expensive when you work it out on a per second basis. It's just that the fact that you're paying it all in one chunk every 3 or 12 cycles or so, that's what makes it seem so expensive. Not really that bad. And of course, no waste tour would be complete without a quick look at the infrastructure overlay. For this is the actual transport spine. I basically ran it this exact same as a power spine. There's just a transport network going right down the middle, along with my ladders and fire poles. So this is the main transport line for everyone to get up and down from top to the bottom of the map. I also use that exact same spine to run, let's see, we will go with plumbing. So most of my plumbing as well actually goes up and down through the center of the map that way too. There's not actually that much, to be honest. You don't really need to move that much liquids about. Most of it's actually just the water going up. And the second one is well, yeah, water and petroleum. That's all I'm really sending up and down. Next up is gases. And for gases, that's a little bit more. I've got a couple of tubes or a couple of pipes for carbon dioxide because I produce an awful lot of that. And another two bringing the oxygen down from the top of the map. Now, I could, of course, have placed the oxygen ones down closer, but then I would have had to run a hydrogen pipe up. I didn't really care either way. And there you have it. A relatively straightforward endgame sustainable base that you can do whatever you want with. There's no complicated automation or anything too messy, no real exploits I'm using, except for maybe the steam turbine heat deletion. I don't know if some people count that as an exploit or not, but that's probably the most exploitative thing I'm doing here. Uh, get to this point and you can pretty much redesign and do whatever you want. You'll have the resources to take care of any problem or tackle any project you want to get involved in. Even if you wanted to use steam turbines to actually generate heat legitimately, you could do that right about now because you have the resources to do so. Now, in terms of tutorials for people, I'm going to have to redo the metal volcano. It turns out there's a jamming possibility. I've been doing some testing with it, and sometimes metal chunks will actually collect here and occasionally in here. I have been doing some research and I'm going to have to put out an update video on that one and basically how to fix that problem so it stops happening. I'm also going to want to redesign the petroleum boiler and do a few other things. So there'll be a few tutorials on that, but as far as I can tell, this is pretty much a stable base, and if you've been following the tutorial so far, you should be able to get to this point with relative ease. Well, not relative ease, it takes a bit of time investment, but it should be quite possible. There's a few questions from videos before I'll have to tackle as well, but I'm going on holidays for a couple of weeks, so enjoy. Hope you enjoyed the base tour and have fun building with your duplicates.